Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chronicle Unlocked Notifications 201. This is a new series that we are starting out, and today the focus is going to be all around getting the right alerts to the right people. The spirit behind this series is we're going to be digging deeper into different sections of Chronicle that help you better understand the different ways that you can use Chronicle to meet your daily needs as well as your staff's daily needs. And so this is just a good way for you either to refresh on certain things that you already know and just learn from us walking through different example cases of what we see folks do, and then also to learn new use cases in the case where you've never explored some of these sections of Chronicle before. So some general housekeeping before we get started. First and foremost, as I mentioned to some folks earlier, if you don't already have Chronicle open, it would be great for you to do so because we're going to pause 2 times over the course of this next hour so that you can set things up on your end and just like make sure everything's configured to your liking. And also, everything you can do today does not require admin access. And so if you are, worried about that because you might be at a different permission level, you don't need to worry about that because everything will be toggleable from, any level of account. If you have any questions along the way in the Zoom chat, all we ask is that you drop them in there. Usually it's helpful if you drop 2 hashtags in front of it, so it's a little bit easier to spot. And then also this is recorded. So whether it's you need to review it later or somebody on your team hasn't had the opportunity to attend live today, they can check out that recording then and it'll have a summary with some of those key takeaways. All right, so let's talk about outcomes from this respective workshop. Here's what you're going to leave with. The first thing is you're going to learn a little bit more about how to get your notifications tuned down to your role and not necessarily just the default setting. The default setting has a lot of strengths to it, but at the same time, we're going to learn the particularities of why you might want to make it a little bit more specific. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about how you can create at least one follow rule for running your caseload. So that will be something that we'll walk through together with a real example, and also Nikhil will share a little more about what he commonly sees people set up in terms of the rules there. And then lastly, we'll have an answer to why you might not be getting the alerts that you expected, because we'll have gone over all the fundamentals in terms of how we go about setting up notifications to be most successful on your Chronicle account. In the case where you're attending today, I know there's some folks that may not be actively using Chronicle. This is also a good opportunity for you to understand more about what exactly is possible when you do, adopt a modern SSD ERE monitoring platform like Chronicle. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it over to Nikhil to share a little bit more about the broad design of how notifications are teed up in Chronicle and talk about what changes when you start refining it further.
Awesome. Great. Well, excited to be showing you all, this feature today. Some of you may have remembered it from your training sessions or, noticed that we made some changes. So I think there's a lot going on here to cover. But to start off, I'm going to start off with just a quick question that I'd love for folks to engage in. Actually, sorry, jumping ahead here, which is just starting at why we have this system and kind of how to think about it. One, when you get Chronicle at day one, you should think about notifications as something you want to turn on immediately and go quite broad with, right? You just don't know yet what's important to your firm given the amount of information Chronicle surfaces. So we want you to start broad and kind of understand, what is even out there, what information you get, so that way nothing slips by, and that's a good kind of default saying to go with. And then as you kind of start developing your understanding of Chronicle, you can start dialing that in and start kind of focusing and tuning this into exactly what each team member works on. So it's broad by design. You can do everything. You can get all the information, it can be a real fire hose, and then you can slowly tune it and really sharpen it to your exact use cases. And that's what we're going to go through today. So, don't worry if you are feeling you get a fire hose right now. We will show you how to make that better. But starting with that first question, right? I would love to hear this feedback from you all. Right now, how do you feel about your Chronicle notifications? A, too loud, B, too quiet, C, about right, or D, honestly, I'm not even sure what I'm subscribed to. So take a minute, pop your answers in, so that way we can understand how we can make this better. Right now we have A from Will Viner. Lots of A's. Rick also has an A. Rick, I know you have a lot of cases. I can't even imagine how many thousands of emails we send. Um, Ben says, with an Outlook rule set up, the notifications are perfect. I think that's a great point. A lot of folks set up specific notifications folders. That way we don't bombard you. Um, Lots of A's and then some C's. All right, yeah. Some C's from TC and Carey and Townsend. So it sounds like some folks have dialed it in, which I think would be great to also have folks share what they're doing at some point. Awesome. But yeah, seems like a majority of A's right now, which I think we can definitely show you how to handle. But so let's start with what following actually does. Um, so the best way to think of following a case is it actually does several things for you, right? We it's kind of like in a case management system when you assign out a case, it is saying, hey, I care about this case and I want to focus on it. So it affects what you get notified on, right? So what email notifications you're getting. Second, it affects what's actually on your dashboard and what you can filter it to. So I'll show you guys what that looks like, but you can actually filter your dashboard to just the cases you follow. So if you're part of a large firm, and you say, hey, I only care about these cases, you can actually filter it down so your dashboard just shows you those cases. And then third is that you can actually have it filter your calendar feed. So if you are using our calendar feature and having it subscribed to your Outlook or Gmail or whatever calendar software you use, you can also have your calendar filtered down just to the cases you're following. So it's really about saying, hey, this is my case. I care about it. Not to say that other people can't be following the same case. So with that, let me actually go into a live demo, kind of walking you through what following does. So let me share my screen. I'll have to send a request. And then let me open this up. Cool. You guys can see it?
Yep,
Awesome.
looks good.
So you guys know this is Chronicle right now, right? So this is your full dashboard with all of your cases, right? Everything in the firm. If you're 20 cases, active cases to 20,000, you have the same dashboard full of all your cases, which can mean it can be quite noisy. Um, to follow a case, and this is the way you do it one by one, I'll go into the follow rules a little bit later. You can click to any specific case. So David here, for example, and you'll see here there is a following or follower button. So this case, I'm already following. I can actually see the followers are me and me. And it shows that it's following. For a different case, say Robert here, I can follow this case. That's why it says follow versus following. And I can click into this and I can now actually see what notifications I can turn on when I follow a case. Just so you know, you don't actually have to turn on any notifications when you follow. I can just say, I might follow this case with no notifications and click save. It shows I'm now following this case. I am a follower. And that also means if I go to the dashboard, I can filter this down to just my clients and that case now shows up because I am following that case, right? And just so you know, if you're a manager of other folks, you can also see what other folks are following. But going back to following this case, right? I can click following and then I can edit the notifications. In Chronicle, we have many new notification types. This is something that's changed in the last couple of weeks that you may or may have noticed. And we now have very specific types of notifications you can turn on. Decisions, pretty self-explanatory. You can turn on decisions at any stage. So that way you can say, I want decision notifications on this case. Milestones are about cases opening and closing at the SSA. So opening means that the case actually was opened. So that means they got the receipt and they're now processing the case. So it could be at the initial level, at the recon level, hearing and appeals. Closed means it closed at that level, right? So if they close out the case at initial, you haven't filed the appeal yet, it's going to be closed. You can get a notification on that. And then dropped is better understood as withdrawn. I know some folks have actually emailed me about what does drop means. It means the case has been withdrawn from the SSA. This could be by you or by the client for multiple reasons. Or, for example, the SSA just removes you. So it's a good way to understand if any case was closed out before it even completed. So it was withdrawn. Status of case is your kind of generic status of case, where it's any change between, assigned to staging, master docket to ready to schedule, and so on. hearing and CEs, this is one of the most powerful ones that is super helpful. Um, and this would be for any hearings and CEs, you can get notified when it's scheduled, when there's any updates like the location changes, if it was rescheduled, sometimes they reschedule hearings, canceled, which we see quite often, the experts change, such as um, an ME or a VE being added, missed CE. So if you're focused on the initial and recon level, if a client actually missed a CE, the SSA does report that. And then attendance decline is with our new client portal that we're launching, just something that there, but you can't use today. So we'll be launching that in a few weeks to months. Um, then there's documents added or exhibited, fairly self-explanatory. And then medical records and info requests. These are for the initial and recon level. You can see when the SSA sends out these requests and if they receive them back. So once again, you can kind of really dial these in, pick and choose what you want. So let me actually drop this screen and go back to the slideshow. Cool. So just to recap that, right? For any case, you can click that follow button, or if you're already following it, you can click it again and you can pick through these notification types to really pick and choose what you want. So there are 7 categories of notifications. There's decisions, milestones, which is whether they open, close, or withdrawn from any level, status of case, which is that high level status the SSA gives, CE and hearings. So that way you can see if something was scheduled, rescheduled, missed, and so on. Documents added or exhibited, medical records sent or received, info requests sent or received. And turning those on lets you get notifications for those cases and you can pick them individually. So, given that there's so many categories, right? I want to kind of help you understand when would you use these. Um, And so, you can imagine from different roles, whether you're an attorney, case manager, or intake, you may want different notifications for different cases. Right. So if you're an attorney, you probably want to know when decisions come in or a hearing gets scheduled, probably less so CEs actually. And maybe you don't want to know about every single document getting added, but you maybe want to know when it's exhibited. Um, Case managers. So if you're really kind of working through with your client, you probably want to know whenever the status changes so you can inform the client, any info requests. So once again, you can inform the client and then documents so you know when they're retrieving new medical records or there's any forms you need to fill out. Case managers honestly probably want the most notifications since they have a lot they need to be working on at any point in time. And then intake, maybe you just want to know the milestones open, right? So you want to know at initial that a case was actually processed, so you know that they have processed 1696, and you don't need to badger your client to ask that attest to the 1696 or anything like that. And maybe you don't need like medical records. So, this is just a starting point. It's on prescription. As we kind of mentioned at the beginning, you want to probably start as broad as possible and then whittle them down because you never know what you're missing until you turn something on. So it's really easy to turn something off. You just don't know if you haven't turned it on. So that being said, we actually want to take a pause now and work through, pick a client, right? Pick some client on your dashboard and start trying to dial in what notifications you want. So I'm going to stop here and let you guys actually take the wheel, go into Chronicle and try to turn on some notifications. And I know I just gave you a lot of information. So please start popping questions in the chat and I can have answer them live as you go through. So we can actually work through an example of what a notification configuration could look like for a client.
Awesome. So if folks want to take a moment to take a look in their settings right now of what they might be following. And then on the other side of things, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and then we'll take a moment to answer some of those questions. And I apologize in advance, but in the future, I will have little music in between these sections for the 2 to 3 minutes that we're going to be doing this.
And kind of I'll also kind of voice over some questions as you guys go through this, but Ben asked, does status and milestones overlap? They do overlap in the sense that usually a status comes with a milestone. But what Chronicle does with notifications is we bundle them per client. So we don't send you an individual email for a milestone and an individual email for a status of case change, we can actually put it in one email so that way you're not getting flooded as much as you could be.
And then we'll ask the question, is the same what's this is it the same process to do this for all clients at the global level?
That's actually what we'll cover right after this with the follow rules. So I might hold on that question, Will. Ann's law firm said, I have social security cases. Do you have a process built for that? Just so you know, and I'm not sure if you're a current Chronicle user, everything Chronicle does is just for disability firms. So it's all social security cases that we focus on.
Awesome. So when folks are done with tuning categories for at least one of your clients, if you can give a thumbs up in the Zoom chat, that'll give me a good sense of where the room is at in terms of this first pause break. And meanwhile, Liz asked the question, how do we remove employees that no longer need to follow a case?
Yeah, for sure. So we are actually going to go really in depth with a lot of the 301 version of following and unfollowing, and that goes into admin management as well in our next kind of follow-up series. But to kind of just give you a sense, for any case, if you're an admin in Chronicle, you can actually click the follow button and choose the person's name and unfollow them. But if there is a follow rule that caused the follow, you have to go edit the rule. So I know that's a lot of probably jargon. I think it will make a lot more sense to 301, but feel free to reach out as well.
Awesome. We're having a good steady stream of thumbs ups. So I think we're in a great place to go into follow rules. Let's dig into that.
Awesome. So, as you guys probably know, we used to have a system for global client notifications, which was a kind of a mouthful and it really makes sense. So, we've changed this and updated it recently to follow rules and notifications. So, I'll walk you through that today. Go to the next slide, which is, why we built this, right? Which is if you're a case manager with 400 cases, you can't hand follow, right? This whole thing we just went through for this example, you're not going to go one by one for all 400 cases you manage and hand follow them even if it's 20, right? It's still something that you maybe don't want to maintain. And especially if you're on a team that handles just a certain level, or you're an intake manager or a paralegal that handles just a certain aspect of it, you don't want to have to keep on keeping your list up to date and your notification rules up to date for the sets of clients that you actually care about. And usually that comes down to level, alphabet, something specific. So that's why we create follow rules. That way you can actually have this all automated without you having to do it manually all the time. So the way to think about the concept of a follow rule is you set up a set of criteria saying, hey, I only want to follow cases at initial from A to G. You set that criteria, the system will automatically follow those clients for you and apply your notification rules to those clients. Um, and then all those things, being the notifications, the dashboard, and the calendar will all automatically update for you for those cases. So it's, building on top of these things we just covered in terms of what following does on an individual level and automating it for all of the clients that you care about based on the set of criteria that you set. So let me actually walk you through a live example of how you do this. Right. Alrighty. So, kind of recap, right? You can go into any client, you see the follow and the unfollow button depending on what state you're in with that client. Rather than going case by case, you can go into settings right over here. You go to your profile, and then there's follow and notification. So, this is the new section where you can actually manage your follow rules. Just in case you are someone who is, doing this for someone else, if you're an admin, you can actually click on a button here, click edit user, and there's the same section, but you're doing it for someone else. So if you want to apply these follow rules for someone else who's less tech savvy or just doesn't have the time, you can apply it to other people. But for my case right now, I'm going to my section, and let me actually clear this out so you can see what it looks like from a blank state. So when you hear, we have a couple presets available for you. Um, where you can say, I want to just get all decisions, right? Maybe you're like, hey, I'm like starting from scratch, just give me all decisions at all levels. Or I want to know whenever a hearing changes, or I'm a case manager for initial and recon, and so I want to know whenever an info request is sent out. You can click one of these buttons and will auto generate the rules for you so that way you don't have to go and configure it one by one. And you can see here, it created my 4 rules. And just to walk you through the anatomy of one rule here, I can turn it on and off, so I can actually just disable one if I don't want it on for now, so you don't have to fully delete it. And then I can edit it. This little edit button is how you edit it. You can change the name, right? Always helpful to give it a full name. You can see here the stage it's set for is initial. So you're saying, hey, only initial cases I want followed, and I want decision notifications on, right? So super simple follow rule here. I'm just saying for my initial decisions rule, for initial cases, I want decision notifications. And that means whenever a case is at initial and it gets a decision, I will get notified on that case. You can see here it matches 52 clients. You can see some example names. That's just helping you kind of understand who it's matching to. And something that is on here is auto unfollow, right? Which means once the rule is no longer true for this client, stop giving me these notifications, stop following them. You can turn that off if you want, but most likely you want it on. And it just means if they no longer match the criteria, remove my follow. So it's an auto unfollow. Just to kind of give you then the other example, so let me actually just save this rule. You can see here, I have this for recon as well. I have for recon decisions, when it's at recon, give me decision notifications. But say we have this one, so let me actually save this. Say I want to get a little more crazy with the hearing decisions rule. Maybe I actually want this to give me a little more information. I can say hearing decisions and new hearing events. That's going to be the name of my rule. I might actually say turn on hearing schedule notifications for this rule and click save. And that now means that whenever a hearing is scheduled, I now get notified on that. And we actually show you right here the things that are on for this rule. All right. As you can see, it's pretty powerful here. To kind of give you just some more examples, right? Let's actually show you how to set up that, case manager focused on info requests rule. I'm going to start from scratch. I'm going to click new rule here. It's going to pop open a new box. And I'm going to call this info requests. And I can say, I'm going to deselect all of these. I'm going to pull those off. And I'm going to leave on info requests. I actually want to know whenever an info request is sent out only. And I can say this is only for the initial and recon stage. So this is now saying for initial and recon, I want to automatically follow these cases and get info request notifications for when they're sent out. And I can click save. And that's my new rule for info requests. Initial and recon, info request sent, any client I get notified on. But say I am a case manager who actually only covers last names A through G, I can just put that in, oops, A through G, and I can click save. And now it's actually a subsegment the initial recon cases to only last names A through G. So if you're a large firm, you can really see how this can get powerful if you want to split up cases alphabetically or any way.
Here are some of those
Alrighty.
out of the box ones that you had. It was like decisions, hearing changes, and initial and recon client requests. Which ones do you usually advise folks to start out with here?
Definitely decisions. Most folks care about decisions. And then if you're an attorney, definitely pick hearing changes. Obviously, you're the ones covering those. So it's helpful to get hearing change notifications. And if you're a case manager, do initial and recon client requests. So yeah, pretty much everyone decisions. And then depending on your role, either hearing changes or initial and recon requests. All right. So that's the 2 ways. Remember, you can either quick add, there's a quick add here button here if you want to add them, or you can create them custom one by one. So now let's jump back to the. So just to recap here, the place you find this is under settings and then profile and then notifications, follows and notifications. You can click on any team member, edit them, and find the same thing if you want to do it for someone else. There's a quick add button. So if you want to quickly add one of our templates, you can just click those buttons and it will generate the rules for you. Or you can click the new rule button and create it manually so you can really dial it in. Just so you know, if you quick add, you can customize those as well. But if you want to start from scratch, that is the follow rule. Um, just so you remember, on the next slide, a rule is a live membership, right? It's not a one-time bulk action, especially you have auto unfollow on. It's going to say going forward and for all my clients right now, follow these cases. Something that had changed prior was global. You used to not be able to actually see who was had these global notifications on. So if someone does turn on one of these auto follow rules, they will show up as a follower on that client. So I know this is something that confuse some folks. Now that whenever you turn on notifications at the global level with these follow rules, they will show up as a follower in that list for each client. So consequences worth knowing, right? Auto unfollow, right? Toggle this on for the rule. It just means that you can do this, you can choose per rule. It means that if they no longer match the criteria, you no longer follow them automatically, right? It will drop off the list that under the each client where it says followers, it will no longer show that name. Um, then the second is it applies to all matches, right? So as soon as you turn on a rule, it will look at the current set of clients and apply you as a follower to all of them and anyone who matches it going forward, right? So it is retroactive in that sense. The one thing I also want to flag is it will not override per client settings. So say that you add follow rules on, and you had already set a couple custom notification preferences on a couple clients, those will take priority, right? Those will always be the rules we notify on first. We won't override those. Um, just also giving the example that we gave before, right? Splitting the caseload alphabetically. This is super important if you're a large firm. You can add those name ranges by last name or first name, and that way you can actually split up those caseloads, and they will automatically get a followed out, kind of assigned out. And so if a new client gets added, they will automatically get followed based on those criteria of last name, first name. So ways firms structure this, right? Most basic is by stage. Maybe you only care about initial or recon. And you're saying, I only want status changes at initial or recon. Super easy to set up. Second is by name range, right? If you're trying to do some sort of balancing between case managers, a lot of people apply alphabetical name ranges to their follow rules. Third is by owner, right? And so as you guys know, Chronicle supports multiple rep accounts. So if you have, you know, a firm with two attorneys and case manager A handles one attorney's caseload and case manager B handles the other attorney's caseload, you can segment by owner. So that way it's kind of like, fully segmented by the ERE accounts. Um, Fourth is by specialty, and this is more about how you dial in the notifications that you want, which is maybe one person only cares about CEs and like they have to call out on every single CE. You can turn on initial and recon, hearing and CEs whenever they're scheduled, rescheduled, and so on, and nothing else. So you can really kind of focus on what do I care about in terms of notifications for my specialty. Um, Fifth is low noise. Maybe you just want status of case, a quick pulse. You don't need to know about everything. So you can just say, hey, just give me the key things I care about. And then sixth, which is totally valid, is say, hey, you know what? I want no notifications. I'm going to just use the Chronicle dashboard. That's where I'm going to go. And you can turn off all notifications. So we're going to take another break now here and let you guys try to build out a follow rule yourself with Chronicle open.
Awesome. And as folks start that process, we've got a number of questions to work through. The first question was around if there's A way that a rule can be created to follow cases that another user follows. In other words, a sync between two people, with the example being an assistant working for two attorneys out of 10.
Unfortunately not. So each user will need to set up their own follow rules. And then of course you can also, as I showed, manage follow rules for someone else by editing, but there's no sync to say, I want to follow all of Will's follows. But you can just
I think
copy the rules pretty
exactly.
much.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think a quick workaround on that would just be copying the same rules, applying it. Rick had the question of, does the rule only apply to cases that the person is actually following or all cases?
So that's where the criteria comes in, right? The rule only applies the notification settings to the clients that fit that criteria of the rule. So if I'm only say I want initial status changes, it will apply to any case that matches initial.
Will ask the question at initial recon level, if we want to be notified when the SSA requests a questionnaire form from the client, I see we can select info requests. Will this be capture all client requests, or do we need to also enable the document added tag?
Great question. So for info requests, you just need to turn on info requests. That will capture anything that the SSA marks as a questionnaire they have sent out. Document added would give you anything that's in the e-file that gets added. So that could be, the CE reports or, medical record requests, that they send out and things like that.
Emily asked, is there a way that we can get notified if ADL forms are sent to a client to complete?
Yeah, so that would be info requests. Under info requests, they do show when an ADL form is sent out, and that would be something you could turn on as info requests sent.
Awesome. Rick asked, if I want to be notified when a hearing is scheduled, where do I set that notification?
Awesome. Yeah. So under follow rules, you can say the stage is hearing. So you just want hearing stage. And then under notifications, you want to add hearing scheduled.
Mike asked, can you combine status filters and name filters? So say I want a rule that applies to all cases at status X with the last name of A to D.
Yes. So you can combine those in the same thing. You can do stage and alphabetical in the same rule, and really kind of get crazy with it. Something I do want to flag is you can even stack rules. This is where kind of it gets 301 again. But if you have clients matched to multiple rules, we kind of do it in order. So you'll see in the following rules notifications, it's kind of like, 1, 2, 3, 4. If they match the first one, we'll take those rules. And then if they don't, we'll kind of cascade down.
Michael asked, is there a follow rule that can be based on a CRM's matter team?
Great question, Michael. That is actually a feature currently in development. So we will soon actually be able to support taking the follows that you have in your case management system like Clio or Filevine and automatically sync those into Chronicle.
And I think what might be useful is if you want to share your screen again and walk through some of the examples of some of these questions, I think it might be useful just for folks to see a representation of what you just covered verbally.
Yeah, for sure. Let me share my screen again. So kind of going somewhat in unordered fashion. As I mentioned, in terms of stacking, right? All of these case, rules have an order to them. So if you want to say, hey, this or rule should apply first, you can reorder them. So we'll cover this more in depth in 301. But if a client matches multiple rules, they go in order priority based on what's here in order. Then to the question of stacking stage and alphabet, for example, this initial rule, I can have initial and recon, and then I can add the range here, A through G, and click save. And this rule now applies for all initial recon cases A through G. So, it does stack in that sense. To Rick's question about hearing scheduled, I can create a new rule. Oh, it's down here. Sometimes that's a little confusing, but jump is at the bottom. I can then say at hearing, I want to get notifications when a hearing is scheduled only. So I might turn off a lot of these and then just say scheduled. So that's how you get hearing scheduled. And just note, hearing and CEs I know are lumped together, but CEs only happen in initial and recon, or at least they're only reported to us at initial recon. So as long as the stage is set to hearing, you're only going to get hearing scheduled, not CE scheduled.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that covered Rick's follow-up question there. And then Mike had a question. Once a rule matches a case, can those rules be locked? For instance, he wants one person handling A through D, and then down the road, they might realize that there's an imbalance of workload, so they want to change to A to C, but they don't want current clients to have to change support staff.
Great question. So, unfortunately, I don't think so. I think as soon as you change the rule, it will automatically unfollow everyone. This is where it gets a little, and this goes back kind of into 301. If you create, if you delete a rule, right? So right now I have this rule and it matches a certain number of clients. I can delete it. I can keep the follows, right? So I can actually delete it. It will keep everyone who's currently under my name, and then I can create a new rule, and then that new rule can have A through C. So that's how you can kind of massage the system to do what you want. But we can definitely get a little more of that in the 301.
Awesome. Let's see if folks have any questions on the second section for follows and notifications. Feel free to drop them in. Otherwise, we're going to go back to the slide deck and talk about what's coming down the road in terms of the 301 that Nikhil mentioned.
Awesome. Yeah. So 301, right? Obviously, this is a super exciting system that lets you redial things in. You can really go down the rabbit hole. We built this system to be pretty flexible. So we have a whole thing around substage as well. So you can sit narrow substage. Like, so maybe the best way to think about it is like someone only cares about hearing pre-hearing, whereas someone cares about hearing post-hearing. That's what substage allows you to do. Rep accounts, so you can mirror, whoever owns account, and then stacking rules and ordering and deciding which one wins. That will all go into our 301 advanced follow rules and setting all of that up.
If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. But with that, let's talk about key takeaways from today.
Yeah. So one, categories tuned to your own rule. Think about the notification types that you care about, and then think about which cases you would want that applied to. So really, we have this extensive list. We also have a great help center article that explains each category again in detail, or you can always refer back to this webinar that we'll send you out as a recording, but you can think about what notifications are possible, what is your role at the firm, and then tune it to your role. Get at least one rule running, follow one case, or add a follow rule and get that going. Definitely at least decisions is obviously an easy starting one. Um, and view who else follows your key cases, right? You can actually see in that list in Chronicle who's following which case. As I mentioned, right, auto follows now show up in that list. And that way you can kind of chat with other people at your firm, see what they're doing, trade notes. And it's always a good way to kind of understand what's possible.
Amazing. And with that, that wraps up Chronicle Unlocked 201 for notifications. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Zoom chat. We will take any final questions at this time. And also, if you can find yourself in the Zoom chat, there's a link for a feedback form. If you can share with us what you are curious about or would like to learn more about within Chronicle. The reason why we're putting this together in terms of today's session is because it came up in some of our peer roundtables that folks would love deeper dives in terms of different sections of the product. And so if you can take 60 seconds to share that feedback, that would be super helpful. And then also a reminder for folks next week. I know I see some familiar names here today. We will be doing our next peer roundtable a week from today. There's both 12 p.m. as well as 2 p.m. Central. And the topic of the month on that side is the people problem. So hiring and scaling of teams. And so if you want to join in on that discussion, those rooms are also open. But with that, let's see if there's any final questions that we maybe missed. I think there was one earlier that may have been covered in the chat, but I'll get it for the purposes of the recording here, which was Mark had asked the question of when a case will start showing up in Chronicle. Specifically, they were looking for a case to follow, but it's not in Chronicle, and SSA had sent them a letter acknowledging that they do represent that person. So at what point does it show up in Chronicle?
Yeah, for sure. So most cases will show up in Chronicle when the field office has processed the 1696 and sent it to DDS. So they have not sent it to the DDS yet. It's sitting in their stack of papers, likely not in Chronicle yet. And then even once it gets sent to DDS, I will say what I've heard is the people at SSA need to click a certain button when they send it over to the DDS to make it show up in the ERE. So lots of folks here I have heard from calls have problems where cases are not getting assigned quickly enough. But the second it's at the DDS queue, it will show up in Chronicle as long as they click the right buttons at the SSA. So unfortunately, if they do not show up in a timely manner, usually you have to call the SSA and wait on their wait line.
And then Mike had shared some feature suggestions to add an open date as a filter and stack that with the other filters.
For sure, that's a great idea. We'll definitely look into it.
Awesome. I think we've covered all of the questions for today, so we're gonna go from there. I think in general, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to us. Otherwise, you'll get the recording and replay for today's workshop. Thanks so much, everybody, for attending this first Chronicle Unlocked session. Hope to see you at the next one.